Hail and welcome to Witching Out Loud, the podcast where we celebrate the art of witchcraft and conjuring magic in your daily life. Join us for a cozy chat about witchy ways and practical woo-woo.
I'm Crystal with Unveiled, necromancer, spiritual trainer, and mentor.
And I'm Kate, priestess for hire and an intuitive tarot reader. Today we want to offer a perspective on Indigenous magic, recognizing, of course, our own position as middle-class white women. But Indigenous magic is at the root of the entire planet, and we want to recognize that. We'll cover lineages, appropriation, and respect for the cultures and practices that give us our Indigenous magic.
And I am going to jump into a vulnerable moment because I've never done this in front of other people. And I am Cherokee. A very small amount of my lineage is Cherokee. My grandfather was born on a Cherokee reservation in Oklahoma. And I honor him by singing and playing my Native American flute in the Cherokee morning song. So before we begin, I want to be super, super clear, and I'm going to read this because I wrote out and was very intentional with my words. So I apologize. I'm going to read it to you on the podcast, but I want to make sure that we're really clear how we're holding this conversation. We, Kate and I, are not elders, initiates, culture bearers, or representatives of Indigenous or African-diasporic traditions. We're not here to teach those practices, give instruction, or open access to traditions that are not ours to share. This episode is about the influence, the history, and the respect about naming the Indigenous and diasporic roots that shape much of modern spiritual and magical culture, and acknowledging how often those roots go unrecognized or are deliberately erased. Our intention is visibility and gratitude, not permission or participation. These are living traditions held by living people. We offer this conversation in humility, with respect, and with understanding that listening is a sacred act, especially with what is going on here in the United States and around the world, honestly, in regards to Indigenous people, African diasporic people. Yeah, you hear what I'm saying?
I do, and it hurts my heart that we have to say it because so many people are harmed. So we're going to get through this episode.
Well, shit, we're just crying before
I know.
we get started.
Fuck.
I was saying it with Kate before. It's like, when are we going to get to a space in our world where we realize we're all one? We're all one fucking people. And to harm one of us harms all of us. And I'm so fucking over it.
And it's more real now. We're recording this on February 7th, 2026. So you can place it in context of what is happening in our political and social dynamic here in the US. It's an incredible unveiling that's occurred and revealed the most disgusting parts of being human. And I'm so grateful that the veil's gone. But it's a massive unmasking, and it reveals filth at the root of our systems, which every colonized person has already known. You know, it's not a surprise to a non-colonizer. And we're now reckoning and facing the reality that the root of this is pedophilia, and the root of this is cruelty and inhuman acts that strip people of their humanity. And so I do not want to move the conversation into the files or anything like that, but that is the context in which we already had chosen this topic And we were supposed to record it last week. And due to technical difficulties, we didn't record it last week. And then the most recent Epstein Files drop happened. And now it's even worse. So that's the context in which this conversation happens. So if we are emotional, it's because we're incredibly raw right now because of everything that's happened in the past month, but particularly what came to light in the past week. So when Crystal and I were preparing last week to have this episode, she said, I really want to highlight that all the magic we use is Indigenous magic. And I nodded my head and I was like, yeah, I'm sure she knows what she's saying. I'm not entirely sure what she's saying. And so I'm going to make a distinction that I came to later. And I'm going to tell you my little aha. There's a difference between practice and magic. And I was thinking practice. I have a shamanic practice, but I don't take from indigenous culture to do that. I stick to core shamanism, my white person path, you know. And as I was driving after that conversation and really thinking hard about what does Crystal mean about all the magic is indigenous, my brain separated practice from magic and had this light bulb moment of, oh, the whole bank account of the magic that we draw upon was placed there by Indigenous people, Indigenous practice, hundreds of thousands of years of Indigenous magic. When we're here in the United States, in North America, and we're drawing on the magic of the land, it's magic that was cultivated by Indigenous people. I think that the planet has magic anyway, but when we're talking about the bank account and the deposits made, that is Indigenous magic. And that's what we're talking about today. There's practice and there's magic and they're separate. And it was such a clarifying moment to hit that of, oh, that's what she's talking about.
And we got into such a great conversation around that kind of brought us into recording the podcast a little emotional. But I truly believe that the land that we live on here in the United States and in almost every culture in the world has roots that go all the way back, right? Our ancestral veneration are indigenous people, all of us. And that's a different indigenous tribe for each of us, but it is indigenous. And we have to be able to reach into that bank account in a respectful way. And I think a lot of magical practitioners do not reach into it in a respectful way. And sometimes that's why our magic goes a little haywire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can
We
speak to
do it
that
in a
when I was
capitalistic way.
in an extractionary way, right? And not within the law of reciprocity, which is spoken about in the book Braiding Sweetgrass in a really eloquent and beautiful way. We do not do it in reciprocity. It's not what we're taught. It's not what the colonizer mind is, and we're facing that and going to have to learn a new way to do it. And I want to talk to this as well when I was learning intro shamanism like a year ago now. I was in it. I struggled with the teacher in that she was sharing. So she had learned her core shamanism. And then the appropriate way is if you want to know more, you go to the Peruvian teacher and get taught and then receive that knowledge of what the local practice is. And she had done that. And she's been a shamanic practitioner for decades. So she had gone to teachers around the world and brought that information into her practice. But I was uncomfortable that she was then teaching it to us. I didn't feel right that she could then turn around and charge money for us to learn from her. And she and I talked kind of briefly about it once the class was done. So I wasn't just completely silent. I did speak up when she invited feedback. But I've reflected a lot on the last year of when you're going to somebody and you're getting the practice, you're infusing your own magic. It doesn't mean that you then turn around and teach it. And I want on this episode for Crystal to talk about her experience receiving training in hoodoo, because she references it like this is what hoodoo does, but she's not saying, and now I'm going to walk you through a hoodoo spell, and now I'm going to show you a hoodoo practice. And I'm learning the distinction between that. And it's really clarifying that you can collect and practice, but it doesn't mean that you can teach. I think that's an important part of understanding what extraction does and does not do.
And I want to be accountable. I've been practicing for 37 years now. It's a long time. And when I was learning, we didn't talk about appropriation or colonization. And I've done all of these things that Kate just talked about. I have learned from someone and taught it like it's my knowledge. When it is my knowledge, but it came from somewhere else. And as I'm now 53 and a practitioner, in the last 5 years, probably 6 years, I've really come to this more collective realization in my magic. And that's why I wanted to bring this topic forward because I'm still grappling with it. So there's probably a ton of you out there who are also grappling with it. Is where did this knowledge come from? And how can I honor where it came from? Because I have most certainly earlier in my life learned a hoodoo spell from a root worker and then turned around and taught that information. I've done it. I don't do it now. I can go back and look in all of my grimoires, all of my books of shadows, and there's no credit given to where I learned that information. And that's on me. But now when you look at my books of shadows and my grimoires from the last 7 years, there's always little footnotes. Learned this from this teacher in this lineage from this, right? And I'm not now sharing that to do some kind of flex of, I learned from Lilith Dorsey. No, Lilith Dorsey did the research and has the lineage to have this information. And she shared it with me. And here's how I have incorporated it into because I want my magic to continue to be more collective, right? So that's why I'm here. Like, we have a lot of shame. As I was speaking, remembered in my previous life in a podcast, I used to do a podcast called The Heartbeat of Kitsap, and it was more leadership focused. And we did right after the George Floyd incident and the huge beginning of the racial reckoning that was happening in the United States, I brought to the team to say, let's put together a panel of our African American brothers and sisters and let's have a real conversation about race in business. And the team pushed back and pushed back. And I'm like, no, they're like, it's political. I'm like, it's our world. We got on board and we had some amazing, wonderful local community members that were willing to be on that. And I handed over the leadership reins to a complete stranger because he was Black and could speak about things I could not speak about. And he asked me tough questions in like a podcast on video. I couldn't even hide. It was on video. And I got to stumble and make those mistakes in front of people. And that was really the biggest turning point in my knowing, like, yeah, we've got to talk about it. We've got to talk about it so that we know how to talk about it. And we've got to talk about it so we can continue to bring it out in the open because that's the only way we're going to heal. Like the wound can't heal in darkness. Yeah. Soapbox. So I, in my very early days of magic, and this was when I was, God, how old was I? 17, 16 or 17. So long time ago. Met this old woman sitting on her porch. And I, to this day, don't even know her real name. She just called herself Ma. Come sit down with Ma. Ma will teach you. Right. And it's like a stereotypical old African American woman sitting on her porch, stripping peas, gardening with the gnarled hands. And she was a root worker. And I sat there helping her snap beans and shell peas and peel potatoes. And she talked to me about the magic of the land and root work. She recognized in me that I was this traumatized little girl that was searching and searching for meaning in the world. And she was one of the first people who I would say saved my life in that trauma because she taught me how to speak to the land. And I'm getting emotional. It pains my heart that I don't even know her fucking name. And she saved my life. So when I talk about doing a honeypot, when I talk about some of the necromancy that I use, when I talk about cursing, hexing, binding, when I talk about putting someone in the freezer, all of that I learned from her. And I don't even know her name. So thanks, Ma. Sorry. Shit.
Did you have multiple lessons with her, or did
Yeah,
she
it
train
just
you over multiple days and you just went back to her porch over and over, or she was just like, info dump and I'm giving it all to you because I don't know when I'm going to see you again, little girl?
it was all just wrapped up in conversation while we were peeling
Amazing.
potatoes. or snapping beans. So, my belief in looking back at her is that she was mixed Indigenous and Black. And it's also part of my fascination in the Gullah Geechee people because they are mixed Indigenous and Black as well. Haitian, South Carolina kind of area. And my belief just when hear her voice in my brain, feel like that may be her tradition and where she came from. And when I start to learn about those practices, it matches up really beautifully. And it's mixed with Indigenous magic and hoodoo. And that's root work. Like it came across when I talk about root work, hoodoo, we did do an episode on that where I shared some of that. Um, but African Americans, as they were enslaved and brought through and come from the islands or enslaved upon the islands, mixed with the indigenous. Because if they escaped, where did they go for safety? Up into the trees and the hills and the woods, which is where the indigenous were as well. So it's all blended together in our American roots of these African and indigenous practices. So, yeah, it was not anything where she sat down and said, "Okay, this is how we make a honey pot." It was, "We're snapping peas." And she's like, "Well, sometimes when you want to get someone, to act nicer to you, you want to sweeten them up a little bit. So you could, what could you use to sweeten them up a little bit?" Like, I'm like, "Sugar?" She's like, "You want to move slower than that, child. It's honey. It's like honey." Right? It's so yeah, it wasn't like she taught me how to do magic. It was that she was making sure I understood how
Grandmother
energy
wisdom.
worked. Grandmother wisdom, absolutely. So, huge respect to all the old women sitting on porches helping little girls who are in trouble.
Amazing.
So all of these practices have been criminalized and in some places are still criminalized. On the hoodoo episode, I talked about how we see hoodoo or voodoo as black magic. Well, it's black people magic. It's not dark magic. And we've done that and vilified, but taken all of their magic and then blended it into our own. So we all do some type of poppet magic that comes from hoodoo, which was all about healing. We all do some kind of freezer or binding spell, which comes from root work and the Gullah Geechee people. We all do some kind of ancestor veneration, which comes from hoodoo, which comes from the Orishas, comes from, yeah, I could go on about all the places that it comes from. And we're not giving that credit. And I think that puts a constriction on our magic because we're not fully connected to where it came from. So that's why I wanted to talk about this. I think our magic right now in the world is a little bit constricted and the water is so muddy because there's so much light on magic and bringing it forward and people are reclaiming some of those magics. But then they jump on YouTube or they jump on a podcast or they jump on whatever to say, "Here, I'm the authority of making a honey pot or a candle spell," right? I like to follow the old witches on Instagram that don't have the right lighting and they are dressed like a child dressed them and they're sharing the magic that their grandmother has done in the Arkansas hills for like 100,000 years. That's who I follow.
And even when I try to reach beyond the North American blend of practice and I go back to Europe, even then, I still feel very entitled to the whole Mediterranean span. And that's because Roman Empire. I feel entitled to all of Europe because I don't know my actual lineage of everywhere at all times in all spaces. And so I just kind of like blanket choose that. But I think it comes from the idea that in the United States, our education system emphasizes the Roman Empire. And therefore, we feel like everything that the Roman Empire touched is now part of our culture. I don't know that that's accurate. I don't know that I could strip Greek mythology out of my life because it is so much a big part of who I am and how I practice and what my pantheon is as well. But it does make me ask myself, why don't I know about anything else? And it goes back to, should I do a DNA test and actually find out where my DNA is? And I think the answer is yes. But even without that, how do we pick and choose if we're asking to go back to the closest to our roots that we can get? How do we then also not just say, well, it was Roman occupied, so therefore I'm part of it? I'm not. I'm not Lithuanian or Estonian. I'm not Finnish. I'm not Norwegian, but Norse is very interesting to me. Norse practice is very interesting to me. So I think that I would invite people, just reflect. I think that's what the invitation here is. When you're ready to look beyond your North American blend of practice, feel free to reflect on, why do I feel drawn to that? Is it for me? And where does the magic for that come from? And conceive of it as their bank accounts, basically. And if I'm preparing to withdraw from that particular practice's bank account, how and why and where's the reciprocity? And how can I get back to it?
Let's talk about what that respect can look like in practice to help people. I think my number one is, and Kate touched on this, is supporting Indigenous and Black teachers financially, right? It's like I can go take a class from, and I'm not dissing her in any way, Heather Ash Amara, who is not Indigenous shamanistic, but she teaches Indigenous shamanistic practices. She has been trained to do so by Indigenous shamans. I would still prefer to go give my money to the author who wrote the book she learned from. I would prefer to give my money to the community that practices those practices, right? So go take a hoodoo class from Lilith Dorsey directly. Don't go to the person who learned from her because she deserves the money in her space, in her community. Go learn how to do ancestor veneration from Jade Esquiwe instead of Crystal Thomas because she learned from Jade.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Like I have all books that are I make sure to go backtrack. So if I see a book that is brand new, like right now I'm going down my Welsh roots. So I started and saw a teacher. Yes, she's Welsh, but who wrote the book she learned from? And then who wrote the book she learned from? And then who wrote the book he learned from? And who wrote the book he learned from? And every time I continue to backtrack, it comes down to the Indigenous people of that land. And so I'm trying to take my practice and my learning all the way back to the Indigenous peoples of the Welsh land to learn from. And that's Welsh mythology and Indigenous practices. So, how can we do that inside of our own bloodline and outside of our bloodline? There is no African in my bloodline anywhere. I have had my DNA tested and I'm about as white as you can get.
And when you're creating a spiritual practice, you are creating a spiritual lineage for yourself as well. So the invitation here is to understand the lineage. Who were your teachers' teachers? Where did they get that knowledge from? Where does the source of their magic come from? So again, just an invitation to understand the lineage that you're stepping into, that you're extracting from, that you're giving recognition to. Everything has a lineage. Even if I were to just do a journey on it and say, I think that this practice is for me. Can you show me where that came from? Then that's personal revelation for you about what you think your practice actually means and who it's actually rooted in 100,000 years back. Feel free to think about that and reflect it and make a lineage as part of your spiritual practice.
I started going down the African path because of necromancy.
Mhm.
So, necromancy has its roots in Egyptian magic and not white Egyptians,
Right,
but we
right.
tend to
Pre-Roman
whitewash it all.
Egyptian.
Exactly. So, I had to continue to kind of backtrack it all the way through. And I'm like, oh, this is really rooted. Oh my gosh, this sounds like voodoo. This sounds like hoodoo. Okay, I can see where some of this is coming from. And it's now then like our world is so small and so connected, and everything's influenced by that magic, by Egyptian magic, which is black magic. And I mean, black people magic. So I'm working to learn that history before I jump into the practice because full disclosure, my whole life, I'm the witch that just like jumps in and tries it. Half of my stuff I've learned through personal gnosis of just jumping in and trying stuff. I listen to the voices in my head, which are the gods, the goddess, my higher self, and quite often Ma. How do I do this? How do I put this? And then I just jump in and make the magic work. Now I'm backtracking and trying to learn the history that brought that magic to me. Because the more I do that, the more power my magic has because it's rooted in this earth and how it came to be here. And I can get rid of that extractive feel to it. So then my magic is one, giving credit to all the teachers that came before me, giving the credit to all the people who were doing it to survive, same as I was. And that creates a beautiful synergy. And I become less extractive in my magic, which means honestly, I don't do spell work as often as I used to. I do a lot of blessings these days, and those blessings just keep coming back to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm learning more and more that I'm a chaos witch. And so that means I am going to blend and I am going to rely on personal gnosis to tell me what it is. But I am still under an obligation to understand where it came from and whose power I'm using to make something happen. Yeah.
And I think also I've gotten a lot of power in sitting in my discomfort when I'm told it's not for me. And that helps me a lot in racism and dismantling my own internal racism, which we have to continue to do. I'm not done. I talk about it because it helps me learn it, helps me embody it better. And so making sure that you sit in that spot when someone's like, yeah, you don't get to practice that, like, I would talk about smudging in that. And I have a teacher, a very well-known teacher, a very well-paid teacher who still uses the term smudging because their teacher taught it to them and therefore it's their knowledge. And I'm like, that's where we need to sit in the discomfort when someone's saying, "Hey, but that's harmful to my practice and it's not honoring the lineage it came from." And you're not doing it in the way that makes it be called smudging. You are using smoke to cleanse, you are using sage to cleanse, but that's still not smudging.
There's a whole three-quarters of the practice of smudging that isn't taught to us, actually. Yeah, smudging, there's a bigger practice than just burning a thing and using the smoke for it.
Yeah, so sit in the
Interesting.
discomfort when someone says, "Don't call it smudging." Like, why am I so uncomfortable letting that go? That's about me, that's about my ego. Like,
And I
what's
had that
wrong with calling
too.
it smoke cleansing?
I'm like, okay, I can use like seining is a thing. It's using smoke, but it's British Isles tradition. But then I was like, should I call it seining or should I call it smoke cleansing? Because I don't know if I'm seining things or not, because nobody can teach me seining. So there was a moment where I was like, I can call it smudging if I want. Okay, perhaps not. Okay, but then what else would I call it? So yeah, we're back to smoke cleansing. I've got core shamanism and smoke cleansing. Like that's my white lady path. That's okay until I go to a practitioner and ask.
I wanna go yeah, go a little farther down that path on how we use it because Ma wouldn't want me to not use what she taught me. And it is a living tradition, which means it's meant to be passed down, but we can give honor to where it comes from, which is why I started going down this hoodoo medicine Gula Geechee path because I feel like that's where she came from. And I can honor her magic a little bit better by learning those roots and maybe going to South Carolina and taking a class from the people there who grew up and lived on that land forever and ever. And because she wants me to keep teaching it. The magic needs to be out in the world, right? The orishas need to be out in the world. So we do need to talk about it and we do need to share it and we do need to use the magic. But let's just honor it a little bit more when we do and give credit where it comes from, right?
Yeah. So you have some good notes here as well, which I think is interesting. Language to use and language to avoid.
Mhm.
So I'll read it off. Language to use is things like I'm influenced by. This is rooted in the lineage of. It's a living tradition, as you adeptly described. And then also, we are not authorities. So those are really important things to pepper into your dialogue about this. And then things to avoid. I borrowed this, or this is a universal practice, the idea of universality. Sure, smoke cleansing is a universal practice. Many cultures use it. However, that's not an excuse to erase what the root is. So avoid saying I borrowed it, avoid using universality as an excuse to not look deeper into things. Avoid everyone can do this. Even there, should you? Just because I can doesn't mean I
Mhm.
should. Doesn't mean it's
Great
appropriate
distinction.
for me. When you're talking, avoid the step-by-step instructions. If this is not your practice to teach, then you speak of it as Crystal, I think, has really made a lovely example of like, this is how you would do a thing, but I'm not going to teach a class about it. And then finally on the list, using spirit names without context. So the actual title of the actual thing without understanding the root of where it came from. I think that's really beautiful.
Especially if you're talking about any Santeria, the Orishas, things of that, like hoodoo gods and goddesses aren't going to react kindly if you appropriate that magic, especially if you're white, because we're
For
the reason they
real.
had to use the effing magic in that way.
Right.
So put it in
Yeah.
context.
As a child, I had dream catchers and I was really excited about dream catchers. And I wanted so much to be Native American. I mean, I was that kid, right? I wanted desperately to believe that it was somewhere in my heritage. And then as an adult, I learned Dreamcatcher is not for me, actually. That, that's actually a very sacred, protected, precious practice. So that stopped being part of what I used. I loved it as a child. And as adult, I know as
I have 2 dream catchers in my house. Both I bought directly from an indigenous person in a tribe on the land I live. I don't make a dream catcher. I also want to talk about the appropriation of how many people, white women, I see with dream catchers tattooed on their body. That would be a very good instance of not knowing the context of a dream catcher and understanding where it comes from. It's not meant to go catch your dreams for you. It's meant to trap bad spirits. And do you want them trapped on your body?
I know, and no offense, I guess, to anybody who has one tattooed on their body, but right, like if you understood that it's a holding of dark energy, then it turns out that's not actually something you want on your body is the holding of the dark energy. But it's a beautiful example of whitewashing, of we took a tradition, we turned it into the prettiest high vibe love and light version of it, which is our massive toxic positivity and white capitalism, and we were like, flip opposite. Now make it love and light. And then everybody's like, what a beautiful love and light practice. And every Native American's like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? That they think that, who flipped it? Or like, there's this cute meme running around that's like, sure, you can smudge when you enter a graveyard because as I understand it, the small part that I understand, smudging is to call in spirits that would help you through a thing. And so, from a Native American perspective, smudging yourself in a graveyard is like a shit-tastic idea, honestly. You're not
Yeah,
pressing
that's why you saw
away
my facial expression,
spirits.
like, "What?"
Right, right. But the concept is, well, I will just smudge myself and then the spirits will leave me as I go. And Native Americans are like, no, sweetheart, you're like attracting the spirits to follow you as you leave the graveyard. Smudging brings in, it doesn't push away necessarily always, like I'm not a practitioner, so I can't speak with authority, but I can tell you about that little meme in particular. It was explained of, oh, don't smudge in a graveyard. Don't do that.
And as the necromancer in me, I'm like, "No, what? What are you doing?" Well, you might as well just say, "Hey, ghosts, everybody come home with me."
Right. They think they're cleansing. They think that smoke cleansing is to push away. Smudging is not the same thing as a pushing away. So, from my little teeny tiny understanding of smudging.
And that's again like going back to the root of where it came from. And then we eradicate the world of white sage and palo santo, which are both indigenous practice plants, without understanding what that plant does and what its energetic signature is. And then we just appropriate it to do what we want to do with it. A better herb to use if you want to do a smoke cleanse would be rosemary because of the energetic properties of that plant is protective. A better thing to use would be dragon's blood, like, get the fuck out. I I did wanna talk about my necromancy before we close up because as I've started learning this new practice, I'm learning differently because of where I'm coming from, and that's the point of this episode is when we know better, we do better. And so I'm taking necromancy and continuing to go back to the Egyptian roots that it came from and the death practices that are so beautiful inside of the Egyptian pantheon. And having to go revisit the time I did work with the Egyptian pantheon and wrong. I did it wrong entirely. So now I'm going to backtrack, and it makes sense why ISIS doesn't want to work with me, right? I've got to go backtrack into that and do some reparations inside of my magic to honor them more completely and fully so that I can continue to learn this new path of mine of necromancy and bring it into the new modern era of death practice and how we can do this kind of soul magic and death practice and still honor the lineage that it came from.
Awesome. Yeah, we can do healing with our lineage and we can do healing with the things that we damaged by using it incorrectly, wrongly, ignorantly. And I think that you're right that so much is becoming visible. It's fine to look back and say, I'm going to heal that relationship. I'm going to heal that breach that I created. It's not, shame is so dangerous. And that's part of what this podcast is about, is doing it out loud, is making it in front of you guys and being vulnerable about the ways that we hurt and hurt ourselves and hurt other people, and being really honest about, I was close to the edge of something really terrible and I came back from it. Or now looking back, I see I caused damage and I can be accountable for that. I think I recently had an experience with a person who just, there's no room for accountability in their repertoire. And it didn't matter how many people could speak up and say, no, you did that wrong. There was so much shame around that person that they could not accept accountability for what they'd done. It's remarkable. So accountability is the opposite of shame. And it's okay to be accountable. And it's perfectly okay to heal from the things that were done to you and that you did. It doesn't mean that we have to stay in shame about things, because shame will continue to pull us backward into old ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And from this moment forward, this earth is forward momentum all the way. There's no room for backward anymore. So I want us all to take this in an invitation for accountability and to understand that shame is not going to serve us going forward. We do not need to self-flagellate in some kind of martyrdom. We need to heal, repair, hold accountability, and move forward in our practices.
That's beautifully said. Yeah. My friend was saying, where the harm comes is when I correct you and you say, that's not what I meant. That wasn't my intention. You're being sensitive, right? And I don't listen and say, "Oh, I had no idea. And thank you so much for trusting me to bring that up."
Yeah, be open to correction is okay. Nobody's out to, I'll speak carefully in this because we see cancel culture happen and that's very scary, but nobody's really out to destroy us and take everything from us when we get corrected. And as descendants of a colonizing people, we're so defensive against correction because we have this idea that if we get corrected, we lose everything that we got. And no, it's ego and it's shame and it's identity, and that's it. Be open to correction. It's really important to let people correct us, and not just on race and not just on spiritual practice, but literally, if I say a thing to a loved one and they say, boy, when you say that way, it hurts me. Don't say, well, I didn't mean it that way. Like you were saying, like be open to the correction of like, gosh, I'm so sorry I caused hurt. That's what people want to hear. I'm sorry that I caused hurt. Can I do anything differently?
And taking it into magical practice, right? If someone comes to one of my classes and then they say in the middle of the class, I think that comes from Santeria. I can't say I didn't learn it from Santeria. So the best thing to do is just to pause in that moment and say, I would like to hear more about that. I would like to learn more about your practice. Would you be willing to share that? What does that look like in Santeria? And being more curious and open instead of taking it on as shame and we're wrong. There's so much infinite magic to learn in the world. We can't possibly know it all. I am not an authority on any portion of my magic. I'm an authority on my practice for me personally, but I'm not an authority on any of the things we're talking about on our podcast. Honestly, I'm just sharing what I know, and I'm hoping other people will share what they know, and then I get to learn more.
Right. This is very editorial. And kudos to my shamanism teacher to bring it back to that. When she solicited input, and I'll tell you, she solicited input once and I demurred. And then she came around again and solicited my input one more time. And I was like, okay, girl, I guess you really want to hear it. I gave my feedback about how I felt about not giving enough context around cultural appropriation. And then she said, that's good to hear that it wasn't enough. I will try to work more in to my future classes. I don't know if she did or didn't. Didn't take another class from her. She didn't say I was fine. She accepted it. And that changed my opinion of her a little bit, like it moved the needle enough that she didn't get entrenched in, well, this is how I've been teaching it for 23 years and nobody else has had a problem with how I speak about it. So you must be wrong, Kate. But I appreciate hearing that. And I will try to up the ante on my conversation around cultural appropriation going forward. Cool. Just be open. We do not have to be so rigid about things.
That was exactly what my ending was. This episode is not an ending or a how-to, but an invitation to listen more deeply, to honor origins, and to remember that magic didn't begin with books, but with people who were in relationship with land, spirit, and survival. So go out there and do some witchy shit. Thanks for listening to Witching Out Loud. You can find us at Witching Out Loud on Substack, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook. Follow us for highlights and reminders. Subscribe for witchy tips, seasonal celebrations, and extended show notes. If you love our show and want to support us further, there's an option to support us monetarily on Substack, as well as sponsorships and advertising opportunities. So please share with us how you are witching out loud. Now go do witchy shit.